Uh-oh.
Okay, we'll start with this. The latest in Ryan Garcia's ongoing anti-doping fiasco, Bill Haney, the father of Devin Haney, calls for Ryan Garcia to be hit with a lifetime ban from boxing. As we all know, the penalties in the United States are not akin to the penalties in the United Kingdom or Japan. They're a lot more lenient here.
Examples?
Where Zolani Tete tested positive for Winstrol and was subsequently issued a 4-year ban by UCAD and the BBBOC.
Zolani Tete!
Where Luis Neri, up until recently, was issued a lifetime ban in Japan for testing positive for clenbuterol.
That lasted a couple of years.
In America, the penalties are nowhere near as harsh for fighters that test positive for banned substances. So in spite of Bill Haney's desire to see Ryan Garcia banned from the sport indefinitely, that's just not gonna happen.
Sorry.
Clearly, there's nothing you can do with this guy but get him out of the sport. Bill Haney told TMZ, it's a terrible thing. A terrible thing for sports in general. It's a terrible thing for boxing.
Is it me or do you get a hint of sarcasm from Bill Haney when he says that?
A little bit. I mean, for anybody that follows the sport of boxing, or anybody in boxing, based out of America, they'll know that in America, they've got a revolving door policy when it comes to fighters that test positive for banned substances. At the very most, they'll hit you with a 6-month ban, and you'll be back before you know it. They're not going to hit you with a 4-year ban like they did Zolani Tete in the UK.
Zolani Tete!
Or what they did to Luis Neri in Japan, the ban they issued him.
Zolani Tete!
It would seem that the commissions are a lot more strict and a lot more stringent abroad than they are in America, which makes it so nonsensical, so silly for people to say that he knew he needs to fight here. He needs to fight here in America instead of over there in Japan, when in Japan, they don't play no games when it comes to fighters that are doping, but in America they do.
All the time.
Ryan's case is just the latest high-profile case to happen on American soil, and some are left wondering what should be done. Is Ryan really being set up the way he's saying he's being set up? Or is he just another dirty boxer that got caught in the act, and all he can do is blame other people for what was found in his system?
Well, you know what they're saying?
That the amount of Osterin they found in his system was so minuscule, so low, that it couldn't have had any effect on his performance, that it was so little, he couldn't have received a benefit from it.
There is a reasonable and scientific explanation behind that.
Not that anybody but Ryan Garcia himself has any explaining to do. So many are playing devil's advocate for him, and this is the argument that they're making, that the amount of Osterin they found in his system was so low...
It's cross-contamination. It's gotta be.
...that it must have come from some supplements that he may have taken. He didn't know what was in it, or maybe what was in it wasn't on the label.
Devil's advocate.
That up until that point, the day before the fight and the day of the fight, Ryan didn't test positive for anything. So what are we suggesting? That he took performance-enhancing drugs the day before and the day of the fight?
Devil's advocate.
And as stated, there is a scientific explanation that reconciles all of this. The negative test, the positive tests.
And you wouldn't believe who it's coming from.
Who?
It's coming from Paulie Malignaggi.
So here's the way it works, and I'm sure Chris also understands, because Chris partially explained this to me as well. Here's how it works when you're microdosing. So you bigger dose off season, which is not when there's no fights and nobody's getting tested, because boxing is the Wild West and doesn't test in between fights. Yep. And then you're microdosing during camp. And when you're microdosing, it is trapped in the fat and therefore not going into your bloodstream. So therefore, it's harder to catch you.
Did you catch that? Because this is the part you have to pay attention to.
When a fighter struggles to make weight, sometimes they're losing all that fat, and you get a little bit of tricklage coming out of the fat, and the drugs will come out in small spurts. That's why they're always caught in small doses. And people, the moronic part of the population will say, oh, that's not enough to help him.
Like what they're saying about Ryan. Does that sound familiar?
No, that's just the part that finally leaked.
It's the leftovers, essentially.
Yes, and because they struggle in weight, which is also a typical thing when you start to think about it, why guys keep moving up in weight. So there's less struggles when they're doping to make weight, and therefore they keep moving up in weight and keep showing no signs of weakening and no signs of aging and no signs of, we don't have to name names. This boxing's rife with it, you know? But nonetheless, now when I started to learn this part, because every single time a guy fails, I'm always asking questions and I'm always learning a little bit more. And this time, when it came to this microdosing situation, it's a big way to beat even the random drug tests, because it's not going to show up unless you're really draining yourself. So therefore, it makes sense why guys keep moving up in weight. So Ryan was struggling to make the weight, and he failed right at the end. But he passed in the middle of camp. This kind of explanation is an explanation worth looking into when it comes to his failed B test, B sample. As for the lawyers, they're going to play lawyer and they're going to manipulate it as much as possible and mention that he passed those tests in the middle of camp. Well, I just explained to you in the method that microdosing work why he would have passed the tests in the middle of camp but failed at the very end. Because at the very end was when he was drained. Remember, he struggled to make weight. He was drained, and therefore the substances start coming out, which also explains why he's now talking about fighting at welterweight, junior middleweight, super middleweight against Benavidez. You also get a little bit of sense of why he would do that as well if this is the case. So once you know how the science of it works, you start to really put things together. You can reach your own conclusions. If you want to be a groupie, you can and reach no conclusions. But I'm the person who's going to keep thinking about and keep thinking about not just fighters now, like Ryan, but also fighters in the past, fighters that have failed, fighters that have not failed, and so on and so forth. Really puts a light bulb over the situation.
What makes those professional annotations so compelling is that Paulie Malignaggi is not a big fan of Devin Haney. He's not one of Devin's supporters, Devin's friends, Devin's fans. But he's speaking out. People know this.
He doesn't like Devin. He doesn't like Bill. They've had it out plenty of times publicly on social media.
And yet, he's not buying it. He's not buying Ryan Garcia's explanation. In spite of the history that he's had with Devin, he's not going to all of a sudden co-sign Ryan's bullshit.
It would be very easy to just go along with whatever Ryan Garcia says since you don't like Devin Haney, like many people are doing. But Paulie's not doing that.
He's saying there's a logical and scientific explanation as to why Ryan's previous anti-doping tests all came back negative, but the ones right before the fight came back positive, because the banned substance that he may have been taking was trapped in the fat.
Right.
And as he begins to burn the fat, to try and make the weight for the fight, traces of the banned substance begin to appear, begin to come out. That's how you reconcile the negative tests before and the positive tests afterwards, right before the fight.
It's not rocket science.
It's not rocketry. It's chemistry. Biochemistry.
Some people are going to ignore this.
They are, but that's not going to stop me from talking about it. And even with all of this, Ryan Garcia could very well be positioned for the winner of Sebastian Fundora versus Errol Spence.
Even if he gets suspended?
Even if. The ink hasn't even stamped the contract for Errol Spence Jr.'s October return fight to meet new WBC and WBO junior middleweight champion Sebastian Fundora in Texas. And already the more significant buzz centers on who that winner will fight afterwards. On Friday's episode of Pro Box TV's Deep Waters, analysts Paulie Malignaggi and Chris Algieri mentioned how a Spence versus Terrence Crawford rematch could materialize at 154 should Spence win after Crawford claims the WBA and likely WBO titles by defeating champion Israel Madrimov August 3rd in LA.
WBO?
Yeah, the WBO, because the WBO ordered Sebastian to fight Terrence. That has to be his next fight, or the WBO title is forfeit. But we all know that Sebastian, he's in the process of finalizing a fight with Spence.
We've known from the very beginning that that's what Samson Lukowicz wants. He wants Sebastian to fight Spence next, not Crawford.
And yet, the most tempting opponent for both the former three-belt welterweight champion Errol Spence and California's Fundora is the fighter who has dominated the sports headlines for the past month, Ryan Garcia.
Garcia has already called out both men after failing to make weight for his April fight with Devin Haney.
The now infamous bout in which Garcia won by split decision after knocking down Haney 3 times but then submitted 2 positive tests for the banned performance-enhancing substance, Asterin, that were confirmed by the B samples this past Tuesday. Garcia, in his post-Haney news conference, said he has envisioned moving up in weight and claiming his first world title by defeating the 6'5" Fundora. As he tends to do, Garcia proceeded to get into a social media scrap with Errol Spence as well, saying before the B samples arrived that he wanted them to fight too.
He's all over the place.
That pursuit is now paused as he awaits possible suspension, fine, and removal of his victory from the New York State Athletic Commission. Suspension estimates range from the lenient 6 months to the stringent 2 years. Boxing Scene has learned that Garcia actually acted on his social media feud with Spence, directing his promoter Golden Boy to make the fight with Spence at AT&T Stadium in Arlington, Texas, where Spence will now fight Fundora. The urgency of that request has cooled due to Garcia's legal challenge of his positive tests. But given the attention he has received through the sport's most riveting drama this year and Garcia's recent pay-per-view successes, his value rockets past perennial pound-for-pound elite Terrence Crawford.
In layman's terms,
Errol would make more money fighting Ryan than fighting Terrence again. The fight with Terrence was so lopsided. Is there even a need for a rematch? Whereas with Ryan,
he is buzzing right now. Good or bad, like him or lump him.
he's buzzing right now and he's worth some cash. It's all about how the New York State Athletic Commission disciplines him, particularly in the category of suspension time. Spence certainly has interest in Garcia based on his back and forth with him, and Fundora's representatives were so willing to accept the exposure and brand name boost of the Spence bout that they're doing so by throwing away the current WBO title he wears by blowing off the WBO's mandate, the WBO's order for him to face Terrence.
They'd rather face Spence because they think it's worth more money.
And if Sebastian were to win, he could then move on from that to fight Ryan, assuming that Ryan doesn't get himself suspended for 2 years.
You gotta beat Spence first.
Beating Spence, the Fundora camp says, would be a career launchpad. To find Garcia waiting next year, following a possible suspension, would mark an even greater leap for the champion with the 80-inch wingspan, 80-inch reach. First things first, Fundora Spence marks a puzzling match between a fighter who was badly beaten in his last fight
And a fundamentally flawed fighter who's been knocked out before.
It makes the fight exciting, Malignaggi said on Deep Waters. You don't know what version of these guys you're getting, Malignaggi said. The promotion will be challenged because you're trying to sell them as they're better than they are now. At 33, having made money, it's harder to come back. Spence might beat Fundora in a competitive scrap, only to put himself in harm's way for the next fight. Spence, 34, actually posted on X Friday that the Fundora bout might be his final fight.
If he loses.
But if he wins, he can then move on and have that Ryan Garcia fight, because we all know he doesn't want nothing to do with Terrence Crawford. If I'm being honest with you, he didn't want nothing to do with Terrence Crawford for years. He hid behind the politics, fighting any and every alternative, going as far as fighting a blown-up lightweight in Mikey Garcia, who had never fought at 147 pounds. But after all of those alternatives were exhausted,
That's when he finally fought Crawford.
and that's where everyone saw firsthand why it took so long to make the fight. Because Spence didn't stand a fucking chance.
Think he wants to run it back with that guy.
Spence is a major ticket seller in his home state, and there's interest in how he'll fare on the heels of that July 2023 beatdown by Crawford and his split with longtime trainer Derek James, and Fundora is intent to prove he possesses a champion's medal. Fundora deserves credit. Controversial as it might be, I don't think he'd have won in March if that cut hadn't have happened. The cut in the Tim Tszyu fight, Malignaggi said. Seems like a good fight, but lots of question marks, and I think Tszyu and Ortiz beat the both of these guys.
I agree.
If Tim Tszyu were fighting Sebastian Fundora in the fall in a rematch, I would pick Tim to win the fight.
I think that Virgil might beat Sebastian too.
And Spence?
You saw what Spence said. Spence is thinking about retiring. That this fight with Sebastian might be his final fight. So ask yourself, is the kind of mentality that he has, is that the kind of mentality you want to have if you're fighting a Tim Tszyu, if you're fighting a Virgil Ortiz, if you're fighting a killer?
We'll have that Fundora versus Spence fight, main event in an NFL stadium, and Tszyu versus Ortiz as a co-main to Crawford versus Madrimov. Now you understand why boxing is so weird. Algieri responded, "It's not weird, it's about butts in seats." I want to see the Zoo versus Ortiz winner fight Spence, assuming he wins. That's an all-action fight. An exciting meet-in-the-center-of-the-ring fight. The future of the division is Zoo versus Ortiz, yet the present boxing is Ryan Garcia.
So expect the Fundora versus Spence winner to follow the money.
Well, there's more money in fighting Ryan than fighting the winner of Zoo versus Ortiz.
So that tells the story.
What should we make of Spence versus Fundora as a fight?
You excited for Terrence Crawford and Marshall?
That question just got you hung up on, man. You so fucking dumb. None of us asked for it, motherfucker. Sebastian Fundora politically ducked Crawford, or you forgot. That's why you so dumb. It's hard not to call these motherfuckers stupid. You telling me I'm hating on Earl because the nigga he fighting decided to politically duck Crawford and say his nose broke. Asked the WBO for an extension to go into negotiations with the dude coming off a loss. You want me to respect a dude that ducked an undefeated fighter to fight the nigga he beat who lost coming off 15 months?
It's exactly the way Nestor Gibbs says it is. You can't get Spence versus Fundora unless the both of them duck Terrence Crawford. You can't, because Errol had a rematch clause if he wanted to fight Terrence Crawford again. He had it, and Sebastian Fundora, he was actually ordered to fight Terrence Crawford.
He is under orders to fight Terrence Crawford. So if the both of them end up fighting each other instead of him, it's because they're ducking him.
So that Errol Spence Jr.'s lame brain fans can call into the Boxing Voice asking rhetorical questions to try to make this seem okay. Try to make it seem like anything other than what it is. A brazen duck. You want to poo-poo all over Crawford versus Madrimov with no oversight as to how we got here. The only reason Crawford's fighting Madrimov is because Fundora wasn't going to fight him. His promoter said he wasn't going to fight him.
You don't want to mention that?
Tell you what it is. You can't tell people who to support and what to root for. You can't. You can't tell them what to do, but what you can do is call a spade a spade. What you can do is tell it like it is. The only way you get Spence versus Fundora is if they both duck Terrence first. And that's what they did. If you want to support him anyway, go ahead.
Just don't pee on my leg and tell me it's raining.
They planned this clandestinely. Behind the scenes, both teams plant this for Spence to face Sebastian. That's why Spence was there ringside. That's why immediately after the Tim Tszyu fight, Sampson said Crawford's got to wait because he wants Sebastian to fight Errol. Coincidentally, that's who he's fighting.
Is Errol a better fighter than Terrence?
No, he's not. We found that out last July.
Then why does Sampson want Sebastian to fight him?
Kind of answered your own question. It's because Errol isn't a better fighter than Terrence, and now everybody knows that. So this is a safer fight for Sebastian than the Crawford fight would have been. This is a safer fight for Sebastian than a Tim Tszyu rematch would have been.
The night of the fight, if it does go down in October or November, Errol Spence Jr. will not have fought in well over a year's time. He'll be breaking in a new trainer,
debuting at a new weight against one of the most awkward fighters that are up there. And you're wondering why Sampson wants this for his fighter instead of a Crawford fight? It's very obvious why.
It's because he got his fucking ass kicked in his last fight and you don't know what version of this guy's gonna show up.
It's because this guy is thinking about retiring.
And this is the kind of shit you want to celebrate?
Like I said, you can't tell people who to root for, but what you can do is tell it like it is.